Okay, so we'll begin this evening with a public hearing, and this is a public hearing of the City of Urbana Community Development Commission, and we'll call that to order at 6:02 p.m. on February 25th, 2025, and will staff please do a roll call?
Chris Diana,
Present.
Robert Freeman, Patricia Jones,
Here.
Ann Hines Silvis,
Here.
Sean Williams.
Thank you, Nick. We have a quorum. So the purpose of the public hearing is to receive citizen input regarding the City of Urbana and Urbana Home Consortium FY 2025-29 Consolidated Plan. The Consolidated Plan identifies needs, goals, and strategies related to community development outcomes and the use of CDBG and home program funds through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, over a 5-year planning framework. The Consolidated Plan includes FY 2025-26 Annual Action Plan, a 1-year plan for the use of HUD's funds in the first fiscal year of the Consolidated Plan period. The notice of this public hearing was printed in our local newspaper. It was emailed to the media, placed on the City of Urbana's website. A draft version of the Consolidated Plan and Action Plan will be available for comment from February 24th to March 25th, 2025, and you can see that at the following locations: online at the City of Urbana website, urbanail.gov, and you can request that from grants@urbanail.gov, request by email. And you can also see the plan at the City of Urbana Community Development Department here at 400 South Vine Street, and in person at the Urbana Free Library. Individuals attending this public hearing may provide input on the Consolidated Plan and Action Plan, and comments may also be sent to staff by mail at the City of Urbana, Grants Management Division, 400 South Vine Street, Urbana, 61801, or by email at grants@urbanail.gov. Comments regarding the draft plan will continue to be accepted until March 25th, 2025 at 5 p.m., and a final draft of the Consolidated Plan incorporating comments received will be submitted to HUD in the late spring of 2025. So now we will have a presentation from staff about the contents of the draft Consolidated Plan.
Thank you so much. So tonight, staff will be providing a brief presentation on the 2025 through 2029 Consolidated Plan and our 2025 through 2026 Annual Action Plan. And we will happily take any questions or feedback from the commission, and anyone who might be watching from home can submit their comments on the plan as well, and we encourage that. So the Consolidated Plan, so there's two parts to this. So the Consolidated Plan is identifies needs, goals, and strategies related to affordable housing and community development needs in the City of Urbana. It also outlines how the city will utilize funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to address those needs. So the Consolidated Plan is the 5-year plan. Again, it outlines goals, strategies, and also resources that the city has available to address critical needs in our community. The Annual Action Plan is the 1-year implementation strategy, if you will, of that 5-year plan, and is also included in the draft document that has been made available tonight. The Annual Action Plan is similar to the Consolidated Plan in that it also outlines goals and strategies and also the resources that will be utilized to implement the projects identified in the Consolidated Plan. So these plans cover funding that the city receives through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The City of Urbana is an entitlement grantee of Community Development Block Grant and home funding. And one of the requirements of receiving these funds is that the city engages in a planning process. Every 5 years, we're required to put together this 5-year plan, and then each year we're required to put together the Annual Action Plan. to show to HUD, but also to the community, how we will be using these funds to meet critical needs in our community. Again, this planning process is really intended to identify needs in the community and to outline strategies and resources that are available to meet those needs. So community input, community feedback is critically important to this process, which is the purpose of this public hearing tonight. So a little bit more background into these two funding sources that I mentioned. So the Community Development Block Grant and Home Investment Partnership Program are both critical funding sources that the city receives to address a wide variety of affordable housing and community development needs, all with the goal of primarily benefiting low-income households in Urbana and also Champaign County. So I'll just briefly talk through these two grant programs and the type of eligible projects that can be funded with these funds. So the Community Development Block Grant is a fairly flexible funding source from HUD. It can be used for a variety of different services in the community. So for example, we can fund public service programs for low-income households in Urbana. We can also fund public infrastructure or facility improvements, again, that primarily benefit low-income households and are located in our community development target areas in Urbana. We can also support economic development activities, housing rehabilitation programs, and there's also a portion of the funding which goes to support staff salaries in implementing these programs. The other grant program is the Home Investment Partnership Program. This program can support a variety of housing activities, including tenant-based rental assistance, construction or rehabilitation of affordable housing, as well as funding for community housing development organizations such as Habitat for Humanity and First Followers. And HOME also includes a portion of funding to support admin and staff. So I'll briefly walk through the sections of both the consolidated plan and the annual action plan and highlight some key areas. The document is about 141 pages long, so we know that most people probably won't want to read it from start to finish, although we encourage you to do so. So we'll just highlight some important pieces here tonight. So the citizen participation process is outlined beginning on page 11 of the consolidated plan. This is where we talk through the different strategies we've undertaken to get feedback from residents. I'll just note the term citizen, that is a HUD term. That's how they refer to that process. Throughout the planning process, we refer to residents or, residents of Urbana to be more inclusive. Obviously, anyone who lives in Urbana is able to participate in this process. But so we use the term citizen because that's HUD's term that they require. But we understand that people who are not citizens are also welcome to participate in this process. The needs assessment is outlined in pages 12 through 47. This is a really critical piece of the consolidated plan where we analyze different needs in the community. It goes into some detail about housing needs and also community development needs in Urbana and also in Champaign County. There's a housing market analysis on page 49 of the consolidated plan. And then beginning on page 83 is the strategic plan. So this is where we outline, we identify based on the needs assessment, what are going to be the priority needs we will be addressing over the 5-year consolidated plan period. Then we identify the resources we anticipate receiving during that 5-year consolidated plan process. And then we also outline specific goals that we will undertake with those funds in order to meet the priority needs that have been identified. So that's an overview of what is in the consolidated plan. The annual action plan, again, it mirrors that 5-year consolidated plan, but it's the 1-year kind of component of the plan. On page 117 is the expected resources section, that's section AP 15. That's where we outline the resources we anticipate having available in the 2025 through 2026 fiscal year. The AP 20 on page 121 outlines our annual goals. So you'll remember I was talking about those 5-year goals in the consolidated plan. The AP 20 talks about the 1 year goals, how we're going to meet those goals in that 1 year period of time, as well as our objectives. The AP 35 talks about projects, which is a little bit more specific than goals. And then the AP 65 is the homeless needs assessment. So those are some important pieces of the annual action plan. And now I will pass it over to Nick to talk about the needs assessment that I mentioned and also that market analysis that is included in the consolidated plan.
Sure. So I'm just going to run through a few data points and talk about some of the major takeaways from the needs assessment and market analysis components of the plan. Again, keep in mind that this is a 140-page document, so we'd be here all night if we touched on everything. So these will just be some high-level takeaways. So one of the first things we're looking at with a plan like this, obviously, is how much does housing cost in our community? We look at a variety of different data sources for that, from the census to the American Community Survey, HUD's Comprehensive Housing and Affordability Study, as well as more real-time data sources, such as what you actually see on the screen here. This is Zillow's observed market rate rent over the last 10 years. One of the benefits of looking at supplemental sources like this, along with the census data we're required to use, is that we can get more up-to-date numbers from these sources, whereas with some of these government sources, there's often a lag of a couple years between the numbers that are getting reported and what the conditions actually are on the ground, which is important because, as you can see here, really in the last few years since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen rents in the local community increase much more rapidly, with the median observed market rate rent being just under $1,300 at the end of 2024. So that's how much housing is costing at the median in Champaign County, again, based on that data source from Zillow. Another thing we want to look at is how is that comparing to folks' income. Here we have a chart. This is HUD's median family income limits for the current program year. To afford that median rent we're seeing of $1,288, one of the measures that's used in housing policy is what's called cost burden, where you don't want a household to be spending more than 30% of their income on rent. So to be able to afford that median rent, a household would need at least $51,120 to afford that without being in that cost burden range. So just for reference, a two-person household earning that amount would be just under 60% of the median family income, or a four-person household earning that amount would be a bit under 50% of the median family income for that household size. There are, of course, households earning below that amount, which is where we do start to see cost burden in the community.
Excuse me for a second.
Sure.
Do you mind if we ask questions as you go along? Would you prefer we wait till?
If we could wait till the end for questions.
Okay.
Thank you. So this next chart shows the frequency of cost burden in the community, broken down by owner-occupied households and renter households. You can see from this chart, the dark blue portions of these charts are households in that housing type who are experiencing cost burden, and then light blue is households who are not currently cost burdened. So you can see from here that more renters are experiencing cost burden, both in terms of a raw total of households and then in terms of a proportion of that housing type, where a little over 50% of renters in Champaign County are experiencing cost burden, and just under a third of owner-occupied households are. So breaking things down a bit further, this chart shows renter cost burden broken down by income range and then household type. So you can see from this chart that cost burden really is pretty concentrated among households with the lowest incomes. So very low income would be 30 to 50% of area median income according to HUD terms. And then really where we're seeing the most need is that 0 to 30% of the area median income range. And then the households we see most frequently experiencing cost burden range are what HUD in the Comprehensive Housing Affordability Study categorizes as the other category. This would include individuals living alone, as well as individuals living with unrelated roommates, and then small related households as well, and then a fairly significant number of elderly households. So that was just renter households on this chart. The next chart, we have the breakdown for owner-occupied households. One of the things that really jumps out on this slide in contrast to the previous one is the much larger proportion of elderly households who own their home and are experiencing cost burden. This tracks with a lot of what we're hearing from service providers who work with this population, where folks have reduced or fixed incomes at the point of retirement and struggle to keep up with housing costs. So another thing that we're asked to look at for the consolidated plan are groups that are experiencing disproportionate housing needs relative to the general population. So here in this chart, we have broken out by race and ethnicity the proportion of households in each group who, in the blue portion of each pie chart, those are households who are not currently cost burdened. The orange is households in the 30 to 50% cost burden range, and then in red, that would be severe cost burden of over 50%. You can see from this chart that white households are generally less likely to be experiencing cost burden. And then digging into that a bit further, this next chart shows the breakdown of which households live in which housing type, broken down by race and ethnicity, with dark blue being owner-occupied households, and then light blue being renter-occupied housing units, where you can see that generally white households are much more likely to own their home. The consolidated plan touches on a bit of the history there, but in short, a lot of that is related to historic discrimination in the housing market that for a long time disproportionately advantaged white households to become homeowners. This in turn produced a wealth gap across race and ethnicity, which continues to reverberate into the market conditions that we see today. And then the last chart for this section, this just shows the point in time count of the local homeless population in Champaign County over the last 10 years. You can see that it's fluctuated a bit, but in more recent years has increased fairly rapidly, which I think is an interesting comparison with that rent chart we were looking at earlier, with in 2024, 279 individuals being identified who are experiencing homelessness. So to summarize some of the key takeaways, we are seeing ongoing increases in the cost of housing. This continues to contribute to cost burden that we see in the community, particularly, although not exclusively, among low-income renters. Certain demographic groups, including elderly households and most groups of color, we are seeing are more likely to experience housing cost burden. And then we also want to keep thinking about this connection between these larger conditions we're seeing in the housing market and the increased need for homeless services in the community. So that was the needs assessment and market analysis, some of the more quantitative data we were looking at. We've also been talking to folks throughout the community, both in terms of doing sit-downs with service providers. We've also been circulating a community needs survey. This is a survey that we circulated in summer and fall of 2024 because we really wanted to get a lot of that input on the front end so that we could have it in mind as we were drafting the plan. So we'll just quickly run through some of the core themes we've been hearing in our feedback. I know it's hard to see on this chart, but that's prioritization ranking based on our survey results. We asked people to rate different service areas among various housing needs as high, medium, or low priorities. So generally, we saw a lot of priority being given toward building new affordable units, both for ownership and for rent. A lot of priority on expanded rental assistance resources, and then also a lot of need for housing services specifically targeted towards seniors. a lot of acknowledgement that there's a need for continued and expanded homeless shelter and services. Almost every service provider we spoke to is at or over capacity in terms of that service area. And then other services that folks in the community have a lot of priority for include mental health services, child care, and food security. So that was a very quick run through of some of the data that we were looking at for this plan. Braden is going to talk about how that's translated to the needs, goals, and projects that are identified.
Okay, so just a real quick, the way that the consolidated plan is structured follows a tiered approach. So the broadest level, we have to identify priority needs that we have identified that we will focus on over the 5-year period. Then we develop goals, which are kind of broad level 5-year goals that we've identified to meet those priority needs. And then in order to meet the goals that we've identified, we identify projects, which are more specific components that talk about what are we going to be doing actually to meet the goals and the priority needs that we have identified. And then the finest level are the activities, which those are the actual day-to-day things that we will be doing to make sure this all takes place. So it kind of flows down from priority needs as the highest level down to the activities, which is the smallest fine-grained level. So the priority needs, those big kind of general 5-year needs that we've identified are not surprising. Obviously, affordable housing, community services, and then community development. So over the 5-year period, we will be utilizing our CDBG and home resources to support a wide variety of activities that support these 3 priority need areas. And again, we do go into more description of these priority need areas in the consolidated plan. So then that next level down, the goals, how are we going to be instituting and furthering those priority needs? We have invest in affordable housing, support households in need, encourage community and economic development, and then support staff planning and administration. And then projects, like I said, as we go down, it gets more specific. So over our 1-year annual action plan period, these are the projects we will be undertaking to further the goals and the needs that we have identified. So you see here we have a variety of projects focused on neighborhood stabilization, housing and support services, neighborhood revitalization, support for our community housing development organizations, tenant-based rental assistance, and then affordable housing and neighborhood development projects as well. So to do all this, we need funding. So the anticipated resources section is very key because this outlines the resources that we anticipate having in order to implement these activities. So we are anticipating that our annual allocation will remain relatively stable at around $389,000 annually. That's the amount we anticipate receiving from HUD. We do anticipate receiving program income in fiscal year 25 through 26. And then we will have some prior year funds that we will be rolling over from this current fiscal year. So all told, in this upcoming fiscal year, we anticipate having $1,089,487 in community development block grant funding. Over the 5-year period, we anticipate that coming in around $3.5 million. For our home funds, home is broken down into kind of 2 categories. So there's our regular home allocation, which we anticipate being $612,000, give or take, annually. And then with our regular home, we also have a substantial prior year balance of just over $3 million. And so you can see there the amount available in this upcoming fiscal year and then the amount available over the 5-year consolidated plan period. And then Home ARP, that was funding that came through the American Rescue Plan Act. That was a one-time allocation of funding, and we have a balance of $1.8 million, which we will carry forward into the next fiscal year. Because that's a one-time allocation, we are not anticipating receiving additional funding. So you can see that reflected there. So that, again, is a pretty quick overview of both plans. We realize it's a long document. There's a lot in it. But it's, like I said, very important that we hear from the community about what are the needs that people are seeing, how do they want us to utilize our resources to address these needs. So again, the plan is available online at urbanail.gov on our website. People can also email us or give us a call if they would like a copy. And there are also copies available at the City Building and at the Urbana Free Library. So with that, we will open it up to any questions you have.
I've got a quick question. Could you remind us why we didn't spend all the money we had from last year, and so therefore it's okay to roll over, which is good?
Yes. So HUD allows us to roll over unexpended balances. We have balances for a variety of reasons. Most often what happens is that we are funding a multi-year project. So for example, we can utilize community development block grant funding for infrastructure projects in targeted neighborhoods. Oftentimes those projects might take 1 to maybe 3 years to complete. They might be a phased project. And so we budget kind of at once for that entire project, but then as the phases progress, from year to year, we might have to roll over funding. So that's probably the most common reason. But then there are also times where there might be activities that we've planned for that maybe are just delayed, or maybe they don't come to fruition. That happens as well, and then we kind of need to regroup and re-strategize. So it could be for a variety of different reasons.
Thank you.
A number of questions. I'm kind of going back to the numbers section here, and yes, I would say in general, I don't know of anybody in real estate who's ever too thrilled with Zillow data, but we'll pass on that one for the moment.
It's one of the reasons we look at a variety of sources.
Yeah. The market rate rent, can you give me any insight as to how that was determined to be 1288? I mean, what data are they using to come up with that?
I don't have all the details on their methodology in front of me. It is something that I looked at, and the plan itself includes a link to the methodology, so I can definitely look more into that.
Well, I guess the basic question would be market rate rent for what? Mm-hmm. Without a definition as to what we're talking about. There's a lot of data in here about family size and income. Properties aren't rented based on family size or income. They're based on number of rooms and so forth and location.
Right. And
that in there, I can tell you there is over the last 10 years in Urbana, there is a vast difference in available housing stock, which probably has as much or more to do with that change in a market number than almost anything else.
Thanks for that feedback. I can say that the market analysis, if you read through the plan, does include a more detailed breakdown of units available and different bedroom sizes.
Personally, I would be interested in seeing that just out of curiosity.
We can get you a copy.
Then the other question is, there's discussion in there about owner-occupied versus rental properties. And what was the criteria for determining whether it's owner-occupied or rental?
That would be data that's being sourced through the American Community Survey, which is done through the U.S. Census Bureau. I don't know their methodology off the top of my head.
I would just, again, my only caution would be if it's from assessor data. Of course, in Champaign County, like in many counties in Illinois, you do not have to be owner occupied in order to have an owner occupied exemption. So when people look at exempt properties versus non-exempt as the reason for owner occupied or rental, that can often skew that, because most of the, especially single-family home rentals in Champaign County carry a homeowner's exemption with them too, because it's written in the lease that way. So that would just, again, be something that can lead you astray on data. Then the third item would be on the rental units. Is there any differentiation in the data that you're looking at as to multiple unit buildings? I mean, 4s and 8s and 32s versus single-family homes, or homes that are subdivided into multiple units?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the market analysis does get into a bit more detail on the number of units available in different structure types. So it kind of breaks it down by, this is the number of single-family homes, this is the number of units in buildings with 5 units, this is the number, I can't remember the exact breakdown. I think it's single-family, 2 to 4, 5 to 10, and then maybe 10 plus.
Usually 5 to 8 and 8 plus. So yeah, those are and that's fine. I'm just, again, interested in that. I always am concerned about data for things that if the foundation starts off with crooked data, it gets worse the farther you take it, so to speak. Some thoughts.
Appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
I'm on the same page that you are, Chris, looking at these rents, and I'm thinking that in Champaign County, there's just this huge range of what's available and also the demand. And one of the things that is a frequent topic of conversation in our old neighborhood, which is pretty densely populated, is this need for more housing for low-income families. And what's being built, for example, for students does not work for families. And that seems to be where a lot of the building is occurring. And also the idea that single-family lots, or a lot where there's a single-family home, should have the permission to have an ADU in the front or the back or the side or whatever. And also that doesn't seem to address the need for housing that low-income families would need. So I'm wondering what your take on this is. Is this really describing the need that we see? Or is it, as Chris is worried about, kind of looking at the numbers and missing the message?
I would say that it's just one data point among many in the consolidated plan. We're looking at a lot of different data sources. So as I said, the market analysis does include a more detailed breakdown of, availability of different unit types. So I think within the scope of what we were looking at, we tried to be as holistic in that approach as possible. And then, another reservation, I guess, I would give with this plan is that this is a plan very specifically for the use of a limited amount of federal funds with specific regulations. So, if we put all the money we had in this plan into production of new affordable units, we'd realistically probably still just be scratching the surface. That doesn't mean we throw up our hands and give up, but this is, one aspect among a broader strategy that needs to be had, both at the local level and then even more broadly than that in terms of addressing our broad affordability needs.
I would also say that the data is one side of the coin of this plan. The other side, and I would argue an equally important side, is sort of the qualitative. You know, we have done a lot of consultation with service providers, housing service providers, social service providers. That's a very integral part of this plan as well, to help kind of contextualize, as you were saying, right? Numbers can kind of suggest one thing, and an important way to contextualize that is, okay, people who are working with these populations, with families that need housing, what are they seeing? And then how does it line up with, or maybe in situations perhaps contradict, the data that you're seeing? So that's another really important part of the plan as well. And what we found through this process is that you know, the feedback we're getting from those stakeholders, those partners in the community that we're working with, typically is aligning pretty closely with that data that we're seeing. And then that's where I think we really come up. The data doesn't necessarily suggest a solution, it's data. The solutions come from those consultations where we're talking with housing authority, other stakeholders that are in the business of providing housing, in the business of providing services, where then they say, hey, this is where we think those interventions are most effective. So again, it's really those two components that I think are important to bring together, that this plan does, or that we're attempting to do. And then also the third component being the public feedback, right? What do residents want to see? That is very critical. You know, in your neighborhood, what would you see as the solution to, you know, these problems? Having more affordable housing in your neighborhood, what would that look like? So I think it's an attempt at a holistic approach, including data, but then also the qualitative, the feedback, and the real world kind of experiences of people working in this field. And so I think that's all really important as well to this plan.
That's good to know, thank you, because that gives a much broader perspective. And it's tempting just to look at the numbers because that's what's in front of you, but I appreciate that reminder of all the other ways you're collecting information. I think that's good.
I guess I would also add there, and you may already be taking that into account, or there may be no way to actually factor that into here. But this community, like many others, the last few years, construction costs and availability of materials has skewed apartment building to larger, fewer units in the footprints, just the same way nobody wants to build a house that's priced at less than $350. And it isn't all because they're looking for profit there, but while they may be upscale, you only have the same number of appliances in a $350,000 house as you have twice as many in two 180s, kind of a thing. Apartments are doing the same thing, especially since there no longer is that great bonus for writing off 100% of things like appliances, etc. So the tendency is to build larger, bigger, easier to control units. And that's also there because one of the things we face in Illinois that is not faced everywhere else is property taxes. So, for instance, in some of the communities around here, and most of the communities around here, just in the last 3 years, the multipliers have raised property taxes 25 to 35%. Those are always built into rentals and costs, and that boosts rent quite a bit and also changes the profile of who is willing to build what kind of housing here. And again, it's not usually going to be affordable housing, so that's going to be another hurdle to overcome.
Thank you.
So at this point, we would have time for anyone in the audience to provide commentary. And I would just remind people, if they're watching this, they can email and they can look at the website. They can go to the library to see the plan, etc. But all those comments are welcome until March 25th. So I guess seeing there are no further comments, the public hearing is closed. Thank you for the information. And we go to our regular agenda. And do we need to do the roll call again?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Here.
Here. Thank you. So we have a quorum, and we'll call the meeting to order. The first item is the approval of minutes of our previous meeting, which was January 28th, 2025. You received those minutes in your packet. Is there a motion?
I move to approve.
Patty moves to approve the minutes of the meeting from January 28th. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Chris. Any discussion?
I like the new format. Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second. Call the question for approval of the minutes of our previous meeting, January 28th, 2025. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The ayes have it, and the meeting minutes from January 28th, 2025 are approved. Are there any additions to our agenda for this evening?
We have no additions.
Thank you. Was there any public input?
There is not.
None, okay. Any additional presentations for this evening?
No.
Okay, thank you. And that takes us to the staff report.
Yes, we have just a brief staff report for you tonight, just with some program updates. So I think it was mentioned at a prior meeting, our upcoming Neighborhood Cleanup Day, which will take place on May 10th. We will be sending out postcards to residents with information on how to sign up for that. This is an event we've held every year for quite some time, and it's a great resource in our community. So be looking out for more information about that. I also just wanted to provide a quick update on our community services grant program. And again, I think this was mentioned at a previous meeting, but this year we have expanded our social service funding. For the past several years, we were providing youth services grants to local organizations, and we've expanded that to community services just more broadly to address some of the needs in our community. So that grant program is currently accepting applications. There will be a webinar on Thursday, March 27th from noon to 1 p.m. where organizations that are interested in applying can get more information on how to do so. And then applications are due for that program on April 7th. And then the last update, I just wanted to provide some information on something that's been in the news quite a bit recently, which is federal funding freeze and just some disruptions that have happened nationally with federal funding. So as you all probably heard several weeks ago, there was a total freeze on federal funding. Luckily, that was later rescinded. The city, we are currently able to access all of our federal grants, which is, we're very grateful for that. But I will say there's a lot of uncertainty at this time. As you just saw at our presentation, we're planning for the next 5 years. We have a lot of ideas and a lot of projects that we're hoping to be able to undertake using HUD funds. But the reality is that that situation is just uncertain right now. We haven't received any guidance or information from HUD about funding levels or what to expect. So we're, proceeding with business as usual for now. We will obviously update all of you as we learn more about what the situation is. But as we begin budgeting for the next fiscal year, which begins on July 1, we are using we're using prior year numbers to essentially create our budget. It's an estimate. It is subject to change. It likely will change. Of course, we will update all of you when we get those allocations from HUD, and then we'll have to adjust kind of our program budgets accordingly. But I just wanted to provide some of that information. Again, I'm sure you've heard about that in the news. There were programs locally operated by Regional Planning Commission that did lose access to their funding temporarily. But as of right now, Head Start is fully operational. The weatherization program operated by RPC is operational. So currently there are no major impacts, but there's been some uncertainty. So I just wanted to provide some information about that. And that's the end of the staff report, and we can take any questions you might have.
Thank you. Appreciate your update. Any questions?
I do have one kind of question, which is, again, in the news, there's been a lot of discussion of, quote unquote, illegal diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that the federal government's trying to deal with. And so I noticed in your presentation, of course, you have race and ethnicity broken out. And it could be that in the future, we will be told to not do that or something. So I guess whatever directions we're going to get, we would have to deal with them. Unless there's a state law that is in effect also that contradicts that, and then we have some other complex situation, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as of right now, as we've been developing our consolidated plan and our annual action plan, we're following all current HUD guidelines and regulations. There's been no new guidance issued to date. There's been a lot of things suggested and things you'll hear on the news, but we haven't actually received any. We haven't been told to do anything differently yet. So that is obviously subject to change.
When you do the HUD reporting, you're actually responding to a format that they provide. So
Yeah, so
Yep.
currently there are several sections in the consolidated plan, labeled disproportionate need. So it's something, at least as far as current regulations, that we're specifically asked to look at. Again, that could change, but we're just filling out the template that we're given.
Any other questions about staff briefing? Okay, moving on. Is there any unfinished business before us this evening? New business. Any new business?
No.
Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. So if there's no more to add to that agenda, I will call us adjourned. Thank you all.